Just you again. I'm here to again show you exact evidence here that psychiatry is human sacrifice in the form of civil death and particularly social death. But civil death is only the legal sanctioning, area of legal sanctioning of social death. But the social death happens whether or not it's officially done civilly through the legal system or not. That is, if you are undoubtedly psychic and you identify as being a psychic, you have a social death warrant placed on your head, a bounty, which every non-psychic, so-called normal human will follow genocidally. Let me just read the Wikipedia here for you on social death. I know some people have problems with Wikipedia. Those people are not very literate, or if they are literate, they're very fascist, because Wikipedia is for people who understand that information should be free and it shouldn't be behind, and knowledge shouldn't be behind a paywall like they do in colleges. In Cuba, education is completely subsidized by the government, even though they require military service in exchange for it. So vastly better than America, which is just, of course, a fraudulent criminal industry that they oxymoronically dare to call education. So, social death is a condition of people not accepted as fully human by wider society. It tells you right there. So if you saw any of my previous videos and were questioning, oh, well, how is he jumping to this conclusion that psychiatrists don't treat their patients as human? Here it is right here for you. It refers to when someone is treated as if they are dead or non-existent. That's right. The refutation of the scientific evidence firsthand of psychic phenomena and telepathy is being denied, is science denial by psychiatrists. They are not scientists, they are anti-scientific science deniers. They are religious. They have philosophies which says that being psychic is morally bad, and that says that it is unscientific to believe or have evidence of psychic abilities, psychic phenomena, so on and so forth. So therefore you get treated like you're dead or you don't exist. Even worse, you get pathologized. You get treated like you're a disease. It is used by sociologists such as Orlando Patterson and Zygmunt Bauman and historians of slavery and the Holocaust to describe the part played by governmental and social segregation in that process. Examples of social death are racial and gender exclusion, persecution, slavery, and apartheid. Now, we have racial exclusion based upon the fact that we are psychics, that we are telepaths by psychiatry. Governments can exclude individuals or groups from society. That's right, they have through psychiatry. Examples: Protestant minority groups in early modern Europe, ostracism in ancient Athens, Dalits in India, criminals, prostitutes, outlaws, institutionalization and segregation of those labeled with a mental illness. There it is right there. It can't get more direct. Changing the identity of an individual. This was a major theme during the Renaissance. So, and it shows you right there that they have control over your identity. They're profiling you based upon basically what amounts to psychiatric Jim Crow laws. They're saying if you're psychic, if you're telepathic, you don't exist, you're not real, you're just a disease, and as if you don't, if you're not literate and use their human language, right? So it's unreconcilable. It could be said that the degeneration theory, which is a psychiatric theory, by the way, theories similar to this theory are most extreme examples of social death. So you're labeled a degenerate. It's what they call the deficit model of mental health when you're psychic. Their theory on being psychic is the degeneration theory. They make it sound more scientific, what they really mean is morally you are sinful. And like I said in my previous video, I linked you to bible.ca.com where it talks about psychiatry before they called it psychiatry. It was called alienation, something like that. Mental alienation. And they had, instead of psychiatry, they had something called Alienist. There's a TV series done by CBS, I believe it is, by the same name of that, The Alienist. And that is spelled exactly how you would think, alien, I-S-T on the end. The idea of degeneration has been popular in both right-wing and left-wing politics. You see, this is a lie. The Democratic election of Republicans versus Democrats is all a smokescreen for psychiatry. And again, like I said, anything that I say, I can support with evidence. If you have the cojones to comment, which most of you probably won't, because I saw 9 days ago, I got 3 views on one of my newer videos, and no one commented. Very interesting how cowardice the human race is. Both left-wing and right-wing politics have used the word decadence to describe social groups whose social, moral, religious aesthetics or political commitments tend towards the inhibition of any or all forms of progress. It's used by some critics on the left to describe their opponents on the right, or towards the undermining of fundamental forms of order, as used by some critics, that is the status quo, on the right to describe their opponents on the left. In either political optic, the forces of decadence can be internal or external. Now, decadence is something that Friedrich Nietzsche, who inspired the Nazis, used. That's a term he used. Internally, the members of political opposition may represent those who have allowed essential ideals to lapse from their view of the world. Externally, members of another society may be considered as cherishing ideals which introduce forces of collapse into the worlds wherein they are immigrants. So in other words, they're saying psychics are non-native to the planet, so why would we give them any human rights? Why would we give them the rights that we have? Hypatia was, by the way, if you're seeing this reference here, Hypatia was, I believe, a Greek citizen who happened to be female and also want to practice science. And Greece tortured and murdered her in public. Not because he was practicing science, because she was practicing science as a female, and that was illegal. And you know what else was illegal is the Hippocratic Oath made it originally illegal for a female to practice medicine. So, in psychiatry, is faux medicine, is fraudulent medicine, apparently, and it is also misogynist medicine. Harem, censure, excommunication, exile, ostracism, shunning, social exclusion, slavery, imprisonment, soul death. In the context of health, social death, when the ailing person no longer has the consciousness to communicate with others, can occur. And this is a lie used in the parents' patriarch, used in the probate courts to call someone incompetent for being psychic, for not believing that they have an illness and not complying with their totalitarian, authoritarian rulership over them as being socially excluded and exiled and shunned by them who don't experience living with psychic abilities like them. So now you're punished for that. Social death occurs during the progression of Alzheimer's disease, and the patient rendered unconscious through palliative sedation, a type of end-of-life care to reduce pain before an imminent death. Employees who retire from their careers can experience another example of social death because of their removal from their daily work lives of coworkers. Of course, these are extreme forms where this would be appropriate and understandable, but social death is a social death penalty when it comes to psychiatry. It's a conspiracy of literal anti-science denying, science denying religion. It's a conspiracy of theocratic, cryptocratic, science denying religion. That's what psychiatry is. It's there to cover up all psychic phenomena and all psychics and genocide against them in a race war. The chief proponent of the relationship between social death and slavery is Orlando Patterson, who states his findings in the 1982 book Slavery and Social Death, a comparative study. Patterson first defined slavery as one of the most extreme forms of the relation of domination, approaching the limits of total power. See, totalitarianism from the viewpoint of the master, and of total powerlessness from the viewpoint of the slave. Social death had both internal and external effects on enslaved people, changing their views of themselves and the way they were regarded by society. Slavery and social death can be linked in all civilizations where slavery existed, including China, Rome, Africa, Byzantium, Greece, Europe, and the Americas. And I can guarantee you this, because China came up when I looked this up. If you know what trepanning is, or have looked up what trepanation is, China is one of the foremost, most ancient places where trepanation occurred. Now, trepanation is early demon exorcism. It's early psychiatry. So I can guarantee you, wherever proto-psychiatry occurred, slavery was also consistent, because it is historical fact that humans who are not psychic will torture and murder psychics under the guise of care, and then later that care becomes under the terminology, umbrella term, medical for their governance. That slavery system becomes medical. So they have to do this because it's medical. It's for the health of the psychic race, which I hardly see how genocide and poisoning and torturing us is healthy for us. But that's literally their beliefs, because if you go into medieval times, you'll find that criminals were punished by torture. And the reason that they were tortured is because in medieval times, the people believed the law system, people in legal authority believed that physical pain inflicted on the body would save the soul in the afterlife. I'm not making this up. You can look it up yourself. The beginning of social death comes from the initial enslavement process, which would most likely come from capture during a battle. That's right. So here we have the slavery, and this is also proof of what I'm saying, that psychiatry is literally a race war. Because what? Because you have capturing of the enemy, right? The captive would be spared from death and created a slave. So if you're psychic, you're captured by the enemy, you're told that you're not psychic, you're brainwashed to believe you have a health issue, you have a disease that's causing you to believe that you have that identity that you identify with. And then you are made into a perfect conditioned slave, reconditioned, re-educated, as they say in the Holocaust, which you already mentioned on here. This is a conditional commutation from a sociologist, of course. Professional person that studies these things was a conditional commutation since death was only suspended as long as the slave submitted to his powerlessness. That's right. You only get to be in society as a psychic as long as you say that you're diseased and powerless and inferior to non-psychic humans. This pardon from death was replaced with social death, which would manifest both physically and psychologically. Physically, it manifests as slow poisoning physically, and that would affect you psychologically because it attacks the central nervous system where the mind and the body connect. And are supposed to be voluntarily controlled by you, the psychic, but those drug poisons, which are literal chemical war weapons, will make that difficult or impossible for you to control your voluntary movements and thoughts so that they can replace them with their own commands and make you the perfect cybernetic slave. And I can get into the cybernetics theory and philosophy as well, what a cyborg is. Well, I can tell you this right now, that's what psychiatry's ultimate goal is. There's documentaries on this, or there's a documentary on this, and they are creating biocomputers and xenobots. These are organic, synthetic life forms that will follow commands and ultimately replace normal humankind. So if you're vying for attention and social status by being normal, by being non-psychic, oh no, I'm not psychic. Yeah, psychic stuff is made up. They're hallucinating. And you believe psychiatry. Well, I'll let you know your days are numbered as a normal human being too, because the elites don't care if you deny psychic science or not. So you can hate us as psychics as much as you want, and you can spend your whole life making profit off of our genocide sanctioned by the government. But the reality is this. Your days are numbered one way or the other, either by extinction by the normal human race or by obsolescence in the workforce. So you'll no longer have slave jobs to do because, including when it comes to sex and probably family, because when we can genetically engineer a family, who's going to get into some kind of dead-end marriage? And you see, I'm not even going to get into all that part of it. Externally, slaves would undergo the loss of their identities through such practices of replacing their names, being branded to indicate their social condition, given a specific dress code that further established them as slaves to the public, castration, and having their heads shaved. Each of these acts alienated the slaves from their previous identities and symbolized their loss of freedom and power and their total dependency on the master's will. See, free will was illegal. And in psychiatry, the history proves that that's what it is. It's the criminalization of free will, as we see in the creation of drapetomania, runaway slave syndrome by a psychiatrist. And you see, this is why I'm referring to myself as Justia, because Anthony Smith is my slave name, literally. And me having black ancestors who were literally slaves, this makes perfect sense. But they're going to tell you I'm psychotic. They're going to tell you that I get this from my mental illness, the fact that I don't deny history, my own family history. I'm crazy. Because they're going to gaslight me and say, oh no, in the same court system in which made me a ward of the court under guardianship is the same court system that owned my ancestors, possibly even in Ohio where I live. The psychological process of social death included the effect of rejection as a member of society, becoming genealogically, how ironic, isolated through the loss of heritage and the right to pass on their ancestry to their children. If that's not genocide, I don't know what else is. That's what psychiatry is doing. It's performing genocide. It's against our reproductive rights, because when they poison people against their will with these chemical warfare agents they call medicine, it causes extreme deformities in the womb. And I've seen some of these people on Facebook. They exist. And they were called schizophrenic immediately when they were a child. And because, get this, schizophrenia, they have linked, falsely of course, linked schizophrenia to different, not just deformities, but to slight, what do you call it? Asymmetry in the body. Asymmetry in the body. For example, one's right earlobe will be bigger or smaller than the other one. And they've linked their studies on this. They claim that that causes schizophrenia. This is all racist, non-scientific nonsense. This is just like the measuring of the skull, facial features. I forget what they're called scientifically, but and saying that certain facial features led to certain personality types and all like this. This is scientific racism and scientific classicism in the sociological sense. Okay. It's not a negative thing to be psychic. And the ones that are born like that or develop like that out of the fact that psychiatry has poisoned them. And that they have killed all the ones who would have the good genes, right? Who would look normal, who would compete with the non-psychic or normal humans, right? Because those people like me who are attractive, blah, 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 yada, yada, and normal, so-called normal looking, right? They kill all of them, especially because they're the primary threat to their species, to their racial dominance. In fact, all social bonds were seen as illegitimate unless they were validated by the master. Same thing with psychiatry. You can't be psychic and have that identity. You have to look at yourself as schizophrenic, or else you won't have any socialization whatsoever outside of psychiatric mastery. Enslaved people who were denied an independent social structure, this is what I'm talking about, not even deemed fully human, as they were only seen as representation of their master's will and had no honor or power of their own. This is the cyberneticization of the human race, but with the psychic race as the guinea pigs. If you think this doesn't apply to you because you're not psychic, you're wrong. The degree to which these practices took place was based on the two modes of social death, intrusive and extrusive. In the intrusive mode, rituals were developed for the incorporation of an external enemy into the culture as a slave. Oh. In the extrusive mode, traditions evolved for including those who have fallen into slavery from within society into the slave status. Both of these modes provided a process of institutionalization of socially dead individuals. That's right. And psychiatry is supposed to be de-institutionalized, but it isn't. Power played an essential role in the relationship between a slave and master, and violence was often deemed a necessary component of slavery. And this is what I was talking about before. Yes, violence. That's what humans are. That's how humans compete. They don't socialize. No, it's not. No, sorry, I can't help you there. It's not real. Governance is not social. It's slavery. It's mastery. A slave was seen to have no worth. They had no name of their own and no honor. Instead, their worth and honor was transferred to the master and gave him an elevated social status among his peers. Violence within the relationship was considered essential because of a low motivation of the enslaved people, and it was also a factor in creating social death and exercising power over the slaves. Whipping was not only a method of punishment, but also a consciously chosen symbolic device to remind slaves of their status. This physical violence had other psychological effects as well, gradually creating an attitude of self-blame and an acknowledgement of the complete control that a master had. Interviews with the former American slaves included statements such as, "Slaves get the masters they deserve, and I was so bad I needed the whipping," demonstrating the justification that slaves had no right to expect, oh yeah, this is just like, oh, schizophrenic, right? Oh, I was so sick, right? They get them to actually say they were sick when they abrogate their entire identities to psychiatry and slavery. Had no right to expect kindness or compassion because of their status in society and devastating mental effects from social death. These effects demonstrated the expectations of the behavior of a slave who had experienced social death. The individuals viewed as the ultimate slaves, the palace eunuchs from Byzantium and China. These are people that have been castrated, and they still say that psychiatry is not emasculation, even though the chemical war weapons that they call medicines give men gynecomastia and lower their testosterone and create more female hormones productions in the body, more estrogen. These slaves were trusted by emperors and could be extremely influential. They were expected to be loyal, brave, and obedient, yet they were considered low and debased and were shunned by society. While Orlando Patterson gives the most extensive study on slavery and social death, he has several critics of his analysis. Those who reviewed the book disliked his refusal to define slaves as property because other groups could fit this definition as well, including women and children. Oh, right. That's, of course, this patriarchy evading the fact that the family is the first slave system you're indoctrinated into. Look, even scholars are upset about the fact. They're lashing out against this patriarchal truth, this patriarchal reality. Because I can guarantee you Orlando Patterson was a Christian. This is why he's not going to point these things out, that slaves were property. Because he knows that women and children were property as well, under what you call the Roman pater familias law, which made a father in Rome basically a slave master of their family. They literally owned and could sell their family, their women and children, their wives and children, into slavery if they wanted to for money. Patterson also does not compare the treatment of slaves to other socially marginalized groups such as prostitutes, criminals, and indentured servants. The third critique given about Patterson's book is the lack of primary sources. Commentators noted that the argument in slavery and social death would have been much stronger had Patterson utilized testimony from enslaved people of their views and meanings of honor, domination, and community. You see, doesn't want to get into the nitty gritty apparently. And I know this is probably far too much of a critique for most in the first place. It's still incomplete and doesn't suffice, right? For anyone with half a brain. So I'm going to leave you there. We're approaching a half an hour video. I hope you enjoyed this, and I will continue either today or tomorrow to upload another post. Thank you. This has been Justia. Goodbye.